at least in the moment, place isn't optional. Like we have to have a place. And so I think that means that we're going to constantly figure it out. We're going to have to figure it out because we don't have another option.
Are you interested in place branding? What do you think about participating in the civic brand at your place? How can we involve the next generation to create urban futures? Stay tuned for answers from Ryan Short.
What is the future for cities? Do you want to learn more about them? Do you want to know how others think about them? Do you want to be part of the conversation? Then this is the right place.
Welcome to What is the Future for Cities podcast. Today, I will interview Ryan Short, author of The Civic Brand, The Power and Responsibility of Place, and co-founder of Civic Brand. We will talk about his vision for the future of cities, place branding, choosing where to live, opportunities opening up, the next generation, and many more. So let's start with a proper introduction. Ryan Short is the CEO of Civic Brand, a firm dedicated to place branding for US cities and local governments. With 17 years of experience, Ryan guides communities to define their unique identities through shared values, vision, and actionable strategies, transcending traditional logos and slogans. His book, The Civic Brand, The Power and Responsibility of Space, delves into how branding fosters unity, civic pride, and the sense of belonging, featuring a foreword by Charles Marohn of Strong Towns. Ryan has spoken at prestigious events, such as City Nation Place Global, sharing insights on community identity. He has collaborated with numerous municipalities, helping align branding with policy to create lasting impact. Ryan's work empowers places to articulate their essence, strengthening community bonds and driving meaningful change through strategic, values-driven branding. And with that, Ryan, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for appearing on the podcast. I highly appreciate your time. Let's jump right in. What does the future of cities mean to you?
When I think about the future of cities, I can't help but think about our planet and humanity and all of those things together. And I think when I sometimes say this, people think it's maybe like hyperbole, but I genuinely believe that the only way that we're going to save our planet is by first saving our individual cities one at a time. I think it's this idea that if we can have healthy, sustainable, thriving cities, and we can have a lot of them, then I think that's ultimately how we save the planet. And so when I think of the future of cities, I think of individual cities' role in being sustainable, prosperous.
Let's go step by step and building block by building block. What does the city mean to you?
Ultimately, it's our human habitat, right? A city is our human habitat. Whether it's a very dense urban environment, whether it's a rural community, to me, those are still human habitats. Even if it's two people living on land together, like they have a human habitat, right? And so when I think of cities, I'm definitely not thinking even just big metropolitan cities. I'm thinking all different size cities, right? It's just our human habitat. And the way that I think about it and the way that I approach it for what is a healthy city, what does that look like? I like to prescribe like the triple bottom line approach, right? The idea of it needs to be profitable, it needs to benefit the people, and it needs to benefit the place or the planet. Really thinking about all three of those things. And it's the reason I wrote the book that I wrote. And I think where cities get wrong and they start to go off track is because they focus just on one of those things. They focus on just being profitable. And profit's important because just like a company, if a company is not profitable, it can't benefit its employees, it can't stay in business. A city does have to be profitable. But if it does so at the expense of the people, if it does so at the expense of the environment, the planet. So I think city is human habitat. And I think if we look at them through a triple bottom line of it does have to be profitable, does have to benefit the people, and it does have to benefit its environment, that's how I think cities can become and remain successful and prosperous and ultimately save the planet.
I would like to come back to the city just a little bit more because what you described, the human habitat, it doesn't necessarily have a physical aspect. You were talking about the environment, But at the same time, I could translate that as well as a digital environment, how we also create that environment in the digital world where people could feel very well, very good, and also have the profitable aspect of this human habitat. I'm curious whether you think that the city is a physical space, because from your expression, your explanation, I translate it more as a community, which for me could be a physical place, in a physical place, but also a digital place. And then we are opening up to a whole another worldview and can of worms, but also opportunities for communities to thrive.
Yeah. So I definitely do think, at least as far as how I'm talking about cities, I do think there's a physical space. I think there's elements of the community. Community can absolutely live and thrive digitally, and it can be profitable, and people can have relationships and connections and community. They can do all of that digitally. And that checks on that triple bottom line. That checks that profit box. It checks the people box, but it doesn't check that place box. And I think a city has to have that third. Until we are like living in the matrix where we're just plugged into something, we still have to have a physical environment. I think the profit in our mental space, I think there's a lot of beautiful things that can happen digitally, like relationship wise. And I'm definitely not the type that says everything about the internet and social media is bad. There's a lot of problems and challenges with it. But I recognize that people can foster connections and build community, and that can feel like cities. But we're still physical human beings. We still have a place. And I think our built environment, our natural environment radically impacts our health and our happiness and who we are. And so I think when I'm thinking about cities, I can't separate the physical part of it, because then I think you're just talking about community, which is important, but it's not the place aspect.
And I'm so grateful that you describe it like this, because you are talking, and please correct me if I'm wrong, from a place branding perspective. What is place branding? And you can start from individually explaining place and branding, because we started to touch upon place. But what does place branding mean to you?
First, I think place branding means so many different things to different people. And it's literally the reason I wrote the book. I think people understand place. It's their cities, their towns, their neighborhoods. But I think when they start to hear branding, they immediately skip to like marketing and promotion. How do we sell this place? And there is a ton of place branding. That's exactly what it is. It's how do we get visitors to come here? How do we get investment to come here? And so that is place branding. But to me, it doesn't meet that triple bottom line because it just focuses on the profit aspect of it. And so I think place branding, when done correctly, starts to not just look at profit. It starts to not just look at how do we get more visitors? How do we get investment? But it looks at those other elements of the triple bottom line. So it looks at how do we benefit our locals? How do we benefit their mental health? How do we benefit their physical health? How do we benefit our environment, both natural environment and built environment? In my book, it's called The Civic Brand, The Power and Responsibility of Place. I use Civic Brand as a rebranding of place branding. So place branding, when done right, is a civic brand. And ultimately, that's just place branding they consider as a triple bottom line. So just as, again, a company can be very profitable, but it could have horrible working conditions, it could ruin the environment, I wouldn't view that as a successful company. But same thing with a place brand. A place brand could win branding awards, attract visitors, attract investment. So it's very successful from a place standpoint. But if there's gentrification, over tourism, it ruins the environment, then I would say that's not a successful place brand. And so a civic brand is really just my definition of a place brand done right.
Is a space brand specific to each space, or it's something which every space could or should strive forward?
I think every place inherently has a place brand, whether they're actively thinking about it or managing or not. You have a personality, and a place has a culture, whether you're trying to work on your personality or work on your culture, it's just there. So I think every place already has it. And I think they're overlapping and intertwined. I like to think about the Russian stacking dolls, where it's like one doll fits in another doll inside another doll. And so you think your country has a place brand, your region has a place brand, your town has a place brand, your neighborhood has a place brand. All of those work together. They're different. They're similar. So it is very messy and complicated, and places are very messy and complicated. But my message is that we have to first just get very intentional about what that place brand is, not so that we can go sell and promote it, but because I think it needs to shape all of our internal decisions. So if we say our place brand is about X, we don't just use X to go market that place. We use X to shape our zoning, to shape our policies, to shape our budget. So it's a lot more about your place brand for governance and decision-making as opposed to just purely promotion.
When you talk about the triple bottom line, you say profitability, people, and planet. And then now you were talking about culture, which could be a fourth aspect. Or do you include culture into the triple bottom line?
To me, culture is like the summation of all of those things. People are very much drivers of your culture, but also like your economy is a driver of your culture. And on planet, I actually, in the book, I kind of translate planet to just place, because I think when you say place, it covers both the environmental aspects that planet attempts to cover, but it also covers like the built environment. So like your architecture, your buildings, your physical space. And so I think culture is shaped by all three of those. It's shaped by the people, their food, their language, their history. It's shaped by the place, the architecture, the walkability, how it feels. And it's shaped by the economy. It's how profitable it is. Culture is absolutely shaped by all three of those. So I view it as like the result of those three things.
It's very interesting because sometimes when I talk with experts on sustainability, they say that originally the three pillars of sustainability was economic, environmental, and social. And they are also talking about involving the fourth, culture. So in their understanding, it's a pillar on the same level of the other three. So it's interesting to hear that you say that it's a result of those three. I would also love to understand, how do you think about the place brand or the civic brand, whether it's static or it is an evolving concept? I'm asking this because my PhD was about smart cities. When cities start to work on smart cities, they sometimes assume that if we achieve this kind of level of smartness, then we are done. We are good. Our culture is saved. Everything is perfect. But cities don't work like that. Cities should evolve with us, because if they don't evolve with us, then they just die out. And I would love to understand how you think about this kind of evolutionary nature, whether civic brands do have the same, or how we can involve this kind of urban evolution into this kind of understanding.
Yeah, I think first, cities are constantly evolving. They're constantly changing. There's new threats. There's new people. There's new opportunities. I think they're always evolving. They're always changing. I think that is a good thing. That is a healthy thing. Where I think cities get off track, though, is they confuse evolving and changing as this mandate for growth. We have to grow. I think so many, especially like city governments and municipalities, if you're not growing, you're dying kind of mentality, right? And I think that there's a half truth in there that like you have to evolve, you have to remain profitable. And a lot of cities have designed themselves in a way to where the only way they can be profitable is if they constantly grow, expand the tax base, reinvest in infrastructure, and it becomes this like cycle of growth. And that's partially true. If you look at even nature, most things grow or die. Very few things just stay. I think there's ways to evolve and progress that aren't necessarily how we always think about growth. I think when we think about growth, we think about very singularly about profit and size. If a city's growing, its population is getting larger, building more buildings, that's one really specific type of growth. But I think there's ways for places to grow and evolve that aren't necessarily population or density, or they just grow and they become better. You can grow as a person, not physically, but you can grow, you can become smarter, you can become more entertaining or more likable. There's so many ways we can grow that isn't just how we think about growth. It's never static. It's never set and done. And I do think that is a fear. And I do think it's a challenge because so many people do want their place to remain the way it was when they arrived at that place. We've done public engagement and survey data in communities all across the US, at least. And one thing that I think is really interesting, no matter what community, no matter how big or small the community is, the longer someone has been in a community, the more unhappy they are about the direction that's headed. And I think that's really interesting because I don't think all of our places are all getting worse. I think it's just our places has changed, had time to change the most from when that person first arrived. And I think that's a unfortunate, it's like cultural thing that we have. I think that's why we see so many countries struggle with immigration, because it's like, we want to come to a country, but then as soon as we're there, we want to freeze things in time, build a wall, not let others in because we don't want it to change. But when we came, we were happy to be like the new person coming, evolving, pushing a place forward, changing the culture and the dynamic. And I do think there's this fear of change and fear of growth that kind of can get in our way.
Thank you so much for describing this kind of growth mentality and growth nature of cities. I love that you brought in, you can grow not just physically, but also improve, which we also understand as growth. So we can also not just forget that part of growing. What kind of advice would you give to people who really want to keep place branding, the brand of their place, but at the same time, we need to change because our environment changes, we are changing, our technology changes, everything else is changing. So we can't make a place's brand be static. Could you give us some advice for such people who are struggling with this?
Reminds me of a story that's in my new book. And so I was interviewing the mayor of Santa Fe, Mayor Alan Weber. We were doing some work with the city of Santa Fe, and he told me about this story that he would tell on the campaign trail. He was citing like an old Western movie that he had seen. I can't remember the name of the Western movie, but the story goes that there was this old Western town and the town was struggling. They were being overrun by the bad guys and they needed a new sheriff to come into town and help them, right, and save them. And so this recruited sheriff came to town and he looked around and he reported back to them and he said, if we want things to stay the same, we're going to have to make some changes. And so obviously it's a funny, ironic statement that we want things to stay the same. And in order to do that, we're going to have to make some changes. But I think that perfectly captures your question. And the challenge with cities is like, we have a brand, we have a place, and we love it, and we want it to stay the same. That's why we came here, we built it, we like it. But the second we stop evolving and moving forward, we lose it. And so it's a really weird duality or like contradiction that like, we have to make changes so that things can stay the same. And yeah, I just think that's like a reality of life that like, if we want things to stay the same, we have to look at what do we mean by stay the same? Do we mean that we value a certain aspect of our culture or that we are profitable or that we are successful? If we want those things to stay the same, you probably are going to have to make changes. We think about your personal lives. Like if I want my career to stay the same, I'm going to have to constantly evolve because our industry is changing and AI and there's all these new things. So I can't just stay the same. I can't just do the same job that I did 20 years ago, 20 years from now. Same is true for individuals. So I think it's true for places.
You just mentioned jobs and I had a really interesting conversation. Basically, I was just listening into in episode 350 talking about urban energy matrix. And Adam Dorr threw in the research part. They are also investigating that potentially in the next 10 to 15 years, we are eliminating work and how that would change our cities. So I'm very curious about that. Do you have any opinions how it would change generally place branding? And I understand each city has their own branding. I'm curious whether there is any general idea regarding this information.
There's so much new volatile change with all the AI stuff and how that's threatening jobs. And I think everybody is so quick to be the expert on it. And this is how it's going to happen. And this is what you should do. And I will be the first to say that I don't know. I have no idea. I don't know if none of us will have jobs in 5 years from now, or if we'll just use AI to do better at our jobs. Like the optimism of that second version. But I do think there's some really challenging, scary things that are like a little above my pay grade of how are we going to navigate that? I think, again, getting back to like human habitat is place. No matter where it shakes out, I think we will all still have to exist somewhere. We will all have to live. We will all have to survive. We will all have to do some level of work, even if it looks really different. And so I still think there's going to always be a role for a place brand and identity, because even if it looks radically different than what our places and economies look like now, you're still going to have people in charge, people fighting for power, wanting their ideas to surface to the top. And the way that they're going to do that is through branding. I talked about at the very beginning of the book that like most people, when you say branding, they think about like companies and products and how you sell it. But I think if you look at things like even like religions essentially are a brand, right? They have an ideal that attracts like followers to follow it. They have symbols that represent and remind them on a day-to-day basis about their values. And so we're always going to need a level of identity and bringing people together to do something, whether our jobs look radically different or not. So unfortunately, I don't have any answers on what I think is going to happen from a job standpoint. I think it's going to be really interesting. And I think it's going to be a lot sooner that we're going to have to deal with that than maybe we thought so even 5 years ago.
It's reassuring to hear that you say place will have a place in the future of cities, because sometimes we can forget that cities are not just a place for work. It's a place to live, to play, to enjoy life, to meet other people. So it's reassuring to hear that you think there is a future for that. Talking about the future, you described the city as the human habitat. You described how if we save cities, we can save the planet. But you haven't described the future you hope for these human habitats. So I'm curious, what does the future of cities mean to you? How do you imagine it, hope for it, fear it?
I'll start with the fear, but then I definitely have hope for it. I think there are some we talked about those things that we don't think are going away, right? We're going to have a place. We're going to have a habitat here. I do think there are some powerful people like Elon Musk, for example, that like probably would prefer we leave this planet and we go to another planet. So like, I think if you're focused on that, you're not going to be focused on saving our planet. You're not going to be focused on saving our individual places. They're more focused on, I don't know, how do we do this on Mars or live somewhere else? I'm not interested in, that's not my world. But I do think there are people that actively are pursuing that and think that's like a viable step forward. What I think the future of cities on this planet at least looks like is more even and healthy distribution. And so when I think about all the problems that we have, whether it's people starving, there's not a lack of food on our planet. It's more a lack of where the food is compared to the people. It's like a logistics problem. When I think of natural disasters and drought and flooding, it's not a lack of water. It's that all the water's flooding over here while there's drought over here. And so I think so many of our problems are like that. When you think of over tourism, it's not that too many people are traveling and having a good time. It's that they're all going to the same city and they're not going to other cities. When you think about economies, it's not that there's not enough exchange and things happening. It's that they're all happening in certain countries or places or with certain companies as opposed to even distribution. The future of cities that is successful starts to get that distribution right, that people still travel, but it's a little more distributed. People still all have food, but the food is more distributed. People all impact their environment, but it's more distributed. Where we get it wrong is we have these large swings, like one way or the other, and that's what causes most of our human problems. I think as we think about that triple bottom line, it just levels things out a little bit. You don't have cities that are really successful and cities that are struggling. You have this more merging in the middle where everybody's doing pretty good. So that's at least my optimistic hope. There's always going to be winners and losers. There's always going to be all of that. But I think success looks like a little bit more evening out.
That's very interesting because you are talking about a system level, while I'm not sure whether that's possible. So when we talk about, for example, networks, and cities create the word network, so resources, people, information, knowledge, whatever. In network science, the supernodes can't balance themselves out. They become more connected. They become even more the center of everything. While the small nodes, which are trying to connect to those, slowly basically losing their significance. So it's mathematically impossible, physically, ? I'm not that into network science, but as far as I understand, it's impossible for the system to balance itself out.
Yeah, I guess my counterpoint to that would be, when I think about a lot of these things, I tend to look at like nature and natural systems to give us answers for some of these things, right? If you think about water, for example, how water flows through a river naturally will disperse and even out. It will fill in the low spots. It will always level out as it disperses. Water doesn't like act to itself. So it's like the opposite of what you're describing with like network nodes where they start to cluster and build together. Water is the opposite. It'll always find the low-lying area and will always level out. And so things can look, even though below the sea, it's all very different. I guess that's how I view it, and would hope that there is an opportunity for cities to do that. Because when I think of why does Barcelona have so much more tourism than other cities, to me, that is an opportunity. That is a high ground of Barcelona, and these other places is the low ground where the water could naturally flow and it could even out. I definitely get what you're saying. And there's a lot to be said for like momentum, and it attracts things, and then that starts building and building upon itself. But I think distribution of water is another model that's also mathematically sound and proven as well. So I don't know which is right for cities, but I think there's probably a lesson to be learned from both.
Just coming back to your nature example, on the water level, I completely agree. It's just also interesting that on the planet scale, which as far as I understand, you would like to see this kind of balance out. On the planet, you can see the deserts where you don't have water, which you said that it would be awesome to have that so much water from the flooding areas at those places where there is no water. While there are places where there are so much water, they can't manage it properly. So it's just also interesting that nature is not necessarily that balanced, which we like to see or like to understand.
I guess the last thing I would just say on that is I think it's never balanced, but it's constantly striving to balance. There's always threats and opportunities. And so it's constantly, and I think that speaks to our earlier conversation of it's never done. Cities are never done. In nature, no species is ever done. Even like the king of the jungle, the lion, like what is the parable of whether you are the lion or the rabbit or whatever the lion eats? Like either way, you're waking up, they're both running. The lion's either chasing the rabbit or the rabbit's running from the lion. I don't think I got those animals right in that parable. But the point is, they're both having to get up every day and work to either live or to eat. And I think nature is like a really good example of it's constantly going to be looking for those opportunities and reacting to stress. And I just think as much as our cities can emulate that, like we will be more successful. Chuck Marohn, who wrote the foreword in the book, he talks about this a lot about like how we've built cities. And he compares like a rainforest that is adaptive and has so many different species that when one species fails, another species just takes over and it keeps going. And that's how a lot of our cities were built, very organically like that. Whereas now, if you think about like row crops in like a cornfield, that's how we're building cities now. And if all of a sudden there's not enough rain and the corn dies, it doesn't turn into something else. Everything dies. Nature in the rainforest is naturally very adaptive. And so, yes, things will fail. There's winners and losers, but it constantly is evolving and something's thriving. And the way we built our cities is just the opposite of that.
Also, I just want to make sure that I understand it correctly. You are talking about balancing out that resources are distributed evenly, while not all cities require the same balance or the same resources. So could you please talk about this kind of balancing out act? What does this balance mean? Everything is the same in every city or something else? Because balance in my mind means this.
I think it would be naive to say like every city is going to get the same number of tourists and every city is going to get the same amount of water. I think it's more balancing out in that just like there are healthy deserts and there are healthy forests. They both have different amounts of water. They both have different species, and those different species both thrive in those environments. However, there can be a point where like the forest is on fire and that threatens those species. There can be a point where the desert is so dry that even the species that are adapted to the desert can't survive. And so when I say evenly distributed, I guess I'd mean more they can equally thrive versus we're literally distributing visitors, water, people, profits. Because yeah, a desert community and a mountain community or a forest community or an urban community or a rural community, they're going to have different things, but they're going to have what they need to sustain their life in a healthy way and in a culture. Barcelona is being overrun by tourists toward the point where it is impacting their built environment and their people negatively. So on the triple bottom line, they're doing great on the profit, but the people are starting to suffer. There's some other communities, they might be doing great things from an environment standpoint. The people might have a good quality of life, but their economy is crushed. Like just a slight leveling out of opportunity as opposed to just perfect systematic distribution, because that would just be like a, I guess, utopia of we're just doling out visitors or resources. And that's definitely not advocating for.
Thank you very much for the clarification. As a person who is coming from Hungary, we tried socialism and it didn't really work. So let's not go for that. You have been talking about healthy and successful places. And in my mind, those sound very connected. What does health and success mean for places?
Yeah, I think obviously there's so many ways in which an individual can be healthy or not healthy, right? There's like physical health, there's mental health, there's financial health. There's all these different things. I just think seeing firsthand how much our place impacts that. I think if so many people they spend time alone, they get in a car. Let's say, okay, I live in an air-conditioned space. I go to my garage that's air-conditioned. I get in my car that's air-conditioned. I drive to work in an hour commute. I sit at my computer. I drive home. In that scenario, a person is like isolated from other people. They're isolated from the environment. And so I think if that's the norm for a lot of people, it's no wonder that we have a lot of people that are in a lot of ways, like both mentally, because they're not having these relationships with people in the outdoors. They're not physically like walking and being active. They're just moving from like a car to a desk to a bed. And so I do think our environment impacts our health, and how we design our cities impacts our health, both physically and mentally. I just think the way we've started to build cities, going back to Chuck Marohn's analogy of the rainforest, we've built cities in a way that are making people more unhealthy, because I think we've started to pull apart that social fabric. And that's why I think, thankfully, some of the digital communities and spaces have filled that void, because people aren't maybe talking to their neighbors and walking to get coffee and having these social interactions. They're doing that online. And that's great that they're getting that one piece of it online, but I don't think they're getting the rest of it. They're not getting the physical part. They're not getting so many other pieces. That's what I think about when I think of health in cities, is like how our built environment shapes our health.
Interesting. So it's not the place which is healthy, it's how the place affects the person who can be, as a result, healthy or less than healthy, unfortunately.
But I do think it works both ways. And so as you're starting to see, I use a lot of nature analogies, right? And water and stuff. So I think of it like a canyon. When a river is formed over millions of years, water is slowly like carving out the canyon over time. So the water is creating this canyon. But then at some point, the canyon starts controlling the water, because the water now is in the canyon. And so I think the canyon shapes the river, but the river at the same time is shaping the canyon. And I think our cities are the same way. So if my city is making me unhealthy and unhappy, then I, as an unhappy person, am likely going to be taking actions that is harming my city back, because I'm not going to talk to my neighbor that maybe seems down one day. I'm not going to pick up a piece of trash. I'm not going to notice if there's smoke in the air if I'm in an air-conditioned space all the time. And so I think it's one impacts the other, and it's like cyclical. So yeah, I think our places absolutely shape us, but then naturally, of course, we are shaping our places right back.
And the other part of this question was success. What does success mean to a place? Can we talk about the success of a place, or again, it's success for people who live in a place and they can achieve success because of the place?
Not to make a cop-out answer, but I do think it's both. I think there was a study of, do healthy and fit people naturally move to areas where there's trails and they can go do stuff? Or do they become healthy because they live in a place where there are trails and they can do stuff? And I think the answer is both. If you live in a place that naturally encourages you to get out and walk and be healthy and socialize, you're going to be healthier. But then at the same time, people in a community that's not like the desire that, they're going to want to go to that place also. I do think it's both. I think your place can make you healthier, and then you can in turn make your place healthier. And then that's not just for health. I think it's with economic opportunity. I think people that start successful businesses in first world countries versus people that start successful businesses in third world countries, that's largely because of their place. Like, they're in a place where it's easier to be successful than somewhere else. They're not necessarily smarter. They just happen to be there. Naturally, those people are going to want to migrate to those places where there is opportunity. That's why people migrate and move, is they're looking for a better opportunity, whether they think it's safety, job opportunity, health. When cities start to decline for whatever reason, those that have the means often move, and those that don't have the means stay in a struggling place. And that makes it even harder to turn around, because it's like this brain drain of talent and money and opportunity that leaves a place. And so it becomes a downward spiral. And I do think we have to be really cautious of that in places, that like, we can't all just move to the place that's got it right. Some of us need to stick around and make our places that we are better, as opposed to just leaving our places.
I will debate that, because personal experience, I moved 2 continents away because my home, personally, I didn't feel that it would be interested in my research topic, the future of cities, thinking about the future, planning for the future, working for the future. And I was working before, so I did my master's degree, then I started to work. And then was the point where I said that Although I'm working on huge projects, I'm doing my work to make it better. I was working on a huge urban development and I couldn't make the changes I would have liked to see. However, I had the opportunity, which again, I was very fortunate, but I also worked for it. I had the opportunity to go to a place which was much more interested in this kind of thinking. I'm curious of your assessment. Did I leave my country in a place where I could have helped more? There is always more, obviously. I felt that I am at a point where I can't do more. However, I can achieve more outside of that place and then maybe help from other places. Or I can help other places from which my original place can learn. And I'm not looking for justification because I'm very happy with my decision. I'm just curious.
No, I certainly don't critique that. And actually, I'm in a similar situation, right? I moved 5 years ago to a place that I think would make me and my family happier and healthier and where we could contribute more, right? And so I think we all do that. We're not all on the same plane. We have different levels of opportunity and privilege and where we're at. And so you leaving your place to a place where you feel like you can thrive or make a difference better, that though also opens up an opportunity in the place that you left for maybe someone else. And I think that's what I think is beautiful about a free market and kind of, I like to say like local first capitalism, because I think capitalism run amok is where you do get a lot of these profit only problems that don't focus on people and the planet. But in just the very fundamental way of a free market works, if you leave a house and go to another house in a different city, now there's a vacancy. And maybe that becomes cheaper and becomes a better opportunity for someone else to move into and they can move there. I have no problems with people moving to the place they're attracted to where they think they can make a bigger impact. But I also think like once wherever you are, you should strive to make your place better. And you may still leave. And I think that's fine. But while you're there, you still have pride in your place and you make, and I imagine that you still probably, I hope, have pride of the place that you came from, even though you feel like you're in a better place now. So yeah, I don't think it's like we all need to just stay where we are and make our places better. I think that natural moving around is very natural. And again, not to go too into the nature analogies, but I think that's what would happen. Species move. If it gets too cold in an area, a species is going to move to an area and then another species will inhabit where they were. If you look at how forests grow over time, that's exactly how that works. It starts with smaller vegetation, and then eventually those trees like crowd out that vegetation. That vegetation dies off, and that allows for new species to come in and grow. And so I think it's all part of a system, and it works. I think the problem, again, just like we talked about flooding and all the water's in one place, I do think there have been communities where like everybody just flees. That's challenging. But I think over time, maybe that place will redevelop because now it's a new opportunity zone for someone else.
It's very beautiful. And I like to think that with this feedback, the system can learn of those places, of those opportunities, of those concerns. You have been talking about nature all along with your answers, and you mentioned sustainability in your original answer to the future of cities. What does sustainability mean to you?
I think sustainability, for me, I'm trying to think of like the most broad level that kind of applies to financial sustainability, environmental sustainability. I think when more people have more options and they're not forced into a choice that they don't want to make, to me, that's sustainable. There is a level of like scarcity mindset, and there's a lot of different ways that you can think about it. But I think a place and a person that is sustainable is likely doing so because they have options, whatever those are. A place that is economically sustainable, I don't have only just one job I can do. I have options. And so if that job fails, I can move to this other job. So I have options. And so therefore I don't have to move or I don't have to change careers. I can just get a new job. I think environmental sustainability is the same way, that I can get food and water and things from these sources. But if something changes with one of those or something evolves, it doesn't just cut off. I have another option. I like to think that having those freedom of options is what makes us sustainable. And I think cities, so many cities have like financial issues. They don't bring in enough taxes to cover the services that they provide. And I think when they get in that situation, they start to make choices that are very short-term and not long-term sustainable because they're in survival mode. Whereas a city that has money, they have the freedom and comfortable and they have options to say no to certain things. They can think a little bit more long-term. When you're full, it's easy to say no to things and be long-term and more sustainable. Whereas when you're starving, you're going to make short-term choices and not make sustainable choices. And I think it all comes back to having healthy options.
It's amazing because what you described as sustainability, for me, it translates more adaptability, not just the freedom of having options, but also the ability to choose between the different options, even if it's not necessarily at that place. Because, for example, with jobs, we have the online market. With communities, we have the online part as well. So it's getting more and more opened up, not just being very local. Although I completely agree with you that keeping the local character as a brand, it's very important, especially for me as an architect who loves architecture and the specific places that there are. It's really nice. We have been talking about a lot of things and you have been mentioning a few of them. What are the 3 biggest fears or concerns regarding the future of cities for you?
I do think that it starts, I was just talking about the fiscal challenges that cities have, right? For me, that's the first one, because I think my next 2 all stem from and trickle down from that. I think most people, the average resident of a city, probably thinks that their city has more money than it does. I think a lot of people would be surprised to see like how financially strained their actual, like the municipality is. Talking about like this actual city governments and stuff versus just the place. I'm afraid of that. Because I think, just like I said, when a city is financially strained, it's going to start making some very short-term decisions. It's backed into a corner and it's forced to make some short-term decisions. And it's those short-term decisions, that's what I'm truly afraid of. And I think that's like outside extraction, outside entities, whether those are corporations or whatever, or countries, is cities like selling off land and letting outside developers and corporations extract their wealth because it's maybe a short-term win. And again, it's if you're starving and I came to you with a hamburger and said, here, I'll give you this little hamburger, but I'm now going to get 20% of your income for the rest of your life. If you're starving, you might take that deal. I think that outside extraction is definitely a concern that I have. And we've already seen that with like corporations and chains and chain stores and chain restaurants and how that we're selling out our cities and places a little bit to outside bidders. And then I think the more that we do that leads me to ultimately the one that I'm the most afraid of is that's just that when that happens, a place loses its identity. Every place becomes the exact same. Every place will have the same 5 restaurants, same store. We all buy our houses from the same person. Like everything will just be the same. But I think it starts with cities being financially healthy. Otherwise, they're going to be forced to take some of those bad deals.
After this doom and gloom, which was not depressing at all, what are the 3 biggest opportunities regarding the future of cities?
I think engaging the youth and getting young people just first to even understand how cities work. I think that's like a huge missed opportunity. I learned how cities work as an adult and as a professional and working. I think people don't really understand how it all works. And I think that's really dangerous because those young people that don't know how cities work, they ultimately become voters and they're going to vote. And if they don't know how it works, can they really be informed? I'm a big believer in our young people. And I think obviously like it is their future, right? And so I think we need to educate them. When you turn on your water and clean water comes out, what is making that happen? What is the city's role and what are the things that are making that happen? I think there's a lot of things that we just assume happen and we don't understand why. I think that's the biggest opportunity is like really double down on the youth. And I think unfortunately, this isn't a knock against older people and senior citizens, but I think oftentimes cities do cater so heavily to older generations just because they are the loudest voices at city council meetings and different things. And they have a voice and they have an opinion, and they're often the ones that have built these communities their whole life, and they've done so much. And so we definitely need to respect that. But at the same time, we're often making short-term choices to make senior citizens happy of not building certain apartments or things just to make that voter happy. Whereas we should probably be focusing more on the youth, renters, and people that are driving the future of our places. So I think that's a huge opportunity. I think the second thing is that like people desperately want to have pride in where they live. People want to be proud. And when people are proud of their place, really, really powerful things can happen. And that's not going to happen if people don't have a sense of ownership. They don't feel like their voice matters. And so I think that's a huge opportunity. I think most people would say, especially young people, they can't wait to get out of their town, or they hate the city's dumb, I think if we can really focus on instilling pride in place, that really is going to arm people to maybe they can stay and they don't have to leave. because they have pride and they have the ability to shape it. Yeah, I think those are probably like the two biggest for me. I guess a third would just be back to our, at least in the moment, place isn't optional. Like we have to have a place. And so I think that means that we're going to constantly figure it out. We're going to have to figure it out because we don't have another option unless Elon gets us to Mars or something and we don't have to be here. But I talk about a lot of like negative, the financial risks and challenges and things like that. I still have a very optimistic, positive. I think people would think it's crazy to suggest place branding will save the planet. I think people would think that's wild. But when they understand what I really mean by that, it's not place marketing or place promotion or tourism, but it's an identity for our places that is profitable, values its people, and values its planet. To me, that's going to create a sustainable place. And that's like very optimistic to me.
I love that you just answered my next question, whether you are optimistic about the future of cities. So thank you very much for also taking the time and express that. You have been talking about engaging the youth, people getting pride and ownership in their places. What can individuals do to work with this place branding?
I think people are a little tired of the like just shop local, support local, because it's like everybody wants to do that inherently, right? But if it's more expensive or if I can't. And so I don't think it's quite as like simple as just do that, because that's also a very privileged thing. You're privileged to be able to support local and to live in a place that has local businesses worth spending money with. So that's when I think, okay, then you have to go a step further back and you have to, again, educate people on like how cities work and why this matters and how like circular economies work so that they don't just choose local because it feels good and it feels like charity. They choose local because they see how it impacts and benefits them and how there is a circular economy and that's going to benefit them in the long term. And how that avoids that external extraction by corporations and like can make their place healthier. But you have to have that education and understanding of place to make those decisions. Otherwise, it's just going to be a privileged message of, yeah, support local. If somebody's living paycheck to paycheck and it's cheaper to buy bread at the chain store versus the local bakery, they're not going to go sacrifice that if they don't understand. So I think that's my message is just like we have to like make sure people understand that choices do have consequences and like how these choices all work together and how they impact our place and ultimately how they circle back and impact you. Because people are going to make, I wouldn't even say selfish choices is the right word because that sounds like a negative thing. People are going to make choices for themselves, the best that they can. You choose to live in the place that furthers your career and where you can make an impact. That's not a selfish choice. That's just you making the best choice for yourself. And I think people do that when they buy bread, when they buy gas, everything that they do. And I think we just need to make sure people understand the consequences of some of those decisions and just how it all works. And I think if we do that, we'll be more likely to say, yeah, we'd love a McDonald's to come to our neighborhood because we would understand that if that puts out of business the local burger shop that's been there and employs people.
This is always a very hard question because I haven't found a person who can really well make measurements on this. You just described how not just the first rate, but the second and third rate consequences of our choices would impact the city. And this is usually very hard because the first, it's fairly easy. But the second and third rate consequences, this kind of, okay, I want to eat burgers, but the local burger shop is very expensive and I see it in the movies that McDonald's is here, so how about if we have a McDonald's here? That's the first rate consequence, that I have a cheaper local shop in the area. However, then that would impact the local burger shop and then the workers around me and then the whole traffic and transport and everything else. So in your experience, how can we think not just the first, but the second and third rate consequences? And I understand that there needs to be education for people how cities work. It's very interesting and very hard, even for urban educated people, to think through these kind of aspects.
I think it's really hard because you're up against very large corporations that have millions and billions of dollars. And so when we say it's about education, okay, who's doing that? Who's going to educate? Is it the city government? They need to communicate and engage with their residents, but they're not tasked with educating everybody. And our schools, well, our schools are funded by at least the US, our schools are funded by our property taxes. And nobody wants to pay property taxes. So we don't want to fund our schools, but then we want our schools to do a great job of educating. I do think a lot of that comes to, again, pride in place. I think we want single entities to come in and solve problems. We want the city government to solve our problem, or we want an economic development organization. And I think the reality is like we all have to do stuff. We all play a role. The role is really small and really different. And I think we can't just say the city needs to educate our kids or the schools need to educate our kids. Like we all have a role in educating kids as a parent, as a neighbor, as a coach. And I think cities are the same way. We all have a role in doing something. And so it's a really tough answer, but it's like when there's political campaigns, there's oftentimes one campaign is funded by a bunch of like $1 donations and the other campaign is donated by like a couple billionaires that put in money. I think we have to have that like everybody is chipping in approach to our places, because that's what we're up against. We're up against a corporation like Amazon that would love to own everything and we own nothing. I think it's challenging. But again, I am optimistic because I do think people at the end of the day do want to be proud of their place. And so as soon as they like start to see how these small actions and like the second and third kind of fallout actions and consequences of those things, I'm the first to say it's not easy. I have friends that are very academic and understand all of this. And that I'm still like, but you still order from Amazon every day, like little things like that. And we'll get into little arguments about that. But I get it. People want convenience. People want easy choices. There's also just so much negativity and bad stuff in the world that like people just want simplicity. They're not trying to make like where they buy a toothbrush a political socioeconomic decision. They're just like trying to get a toothbrush, right? And so I get that people have that fatigue of like negativity and they don't want every decision in their life to be tied to that. But every decision is tied to that, unfortunately. So I definitely don't blame people that I want to bury my head in the sand at times and not think about some of this stuff. But I think the more that we can not do that, that's our hope.
I also agree that there is a collective responsibility. I would like to just add to that a caveat that it's not that everybody is responsible for the same things. Everybody has their own specific roles to play. So if you feel that you are overwhelmed by the choice of where to buy your toothbrush from, don't care about that. Just focus on what you can do and you want to focus on. Which brings us neatly to what is your role in establishing the future of cities, Ryan?
And I 100% agree with that because people too easily be overwhelmed with that they have to be the one to solve all these problems that are just, they can't. But my personal role is, my goal is to help create more lovable places and help places just become the best version of themselves. And so again, like we're talking about, like not every place is going to be a big tourist attraction. Not every place is going to be this big urban center. It's just how can every place that I work with and talk to, how can I make them just a slightly better version of themselves? Even if it's just like 1% better. I feel like if I can do that, I've moved the needle across a number of places. And all of those places have people that live there for future generations, and that should trickle down and benefit them. And so I just want to help make places a little bit better. It doesn't even have to be radically better and off the charts. Again, to go back to the crazy statement of our cities are going to save the planet. If every city can be 1% better, but still remain like the best version of itself, I think that makes a radical difference on the planet and the world. That's my goal and that's my role. I personally do that through public engagement, place branding, and placemaking, because I think those are the ways that at least I'm equipped to move the needle. I think there's a lot of ways to do it. I don't think those are the only ways, but I think those are some really important ways.
Ryan, thank you so much for your time today and your answers. And please keep up this good work, because we do need to remind ourselves that our places have their own character and we can work with them as brands. Do you have any closing comments or requests for the audience?
I appreciate you letting me come on and take the time to chat with me, and appreciate everybody listening. If it interests you, obviously my new book is called The Civic Brand, The Power and Responsibility of Place. Check it out, read it. And if you love it, buy a box of them and send it to your city council and city leaders so that they can all read it. And that's how we'll make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ryan.
It was really interesting to hear from Ryan about his understanding of collective responsibility for creating the better future we want to see for our cities, thus the planet. Not to mention his focus on resource distribution. Alan Savory talked about resource management as the root cause of every urban challenge in episode 356. You can find out more about Ryan online. All the links are in the show notes. What was the most interesting part for you? What questions did arise regarding Ryan's approach to the future of cities? What have you learned from this interview? Let me know on Twitter at WTF4Cities or on the WTF4Cities.com website where the transcripts and show notes are available. You can also subscribe on the website not to miss any new episodes and leave some feedback. I hope this was an interesting interview for you as well, and thanks for tuning in.
What is the Future for Cities podcast?